Hi there, I'm Morty Oberstein from Rank Ranger, and today we're going to go through how it is we can identify Google's overall mobile philosophy, its overall mobile outlook, just by seeing how it trends certain SERP features differently on mobile than it does on desktop. Now sit back and relax, because this is not just a skim the surface sort of study. We're going to go through a major deep dive into how Google actually trends a whole slew of its SERP features, ask a whole bunch of questions, and offer a unifying theory that explains why Google does what it does and thinks what it thinks about the mobile SERP. So enjoy. All right, so let's start off with some basic facts, get them out of the way sort of thing. One, Google treats the mobile SERP differently than desktop. Like you didn't know that already, right? But this difference is accentuated by the fact that there are different SERP features on mobile than there are on desktop. They appear differently on mobile than they do on desktop, and they have their own data trend on mobile than they do on desktop. All of this sort of lends to a unique character that we'd call the mobile SERP. To understand what Google's up to in the mobile SERP and why it thinks about the mobile SERP the way that it does, we're going to take a look at a slew of SERP feature data. We're going to look at it both on mobile and on desktop. We're going to look at power players like LocalPack and some smaller players like image thumbnails, and you'll see why. Sneak peek, image thumbnails are a great place to start because it's concrete. We know what Google is up to and why it's up to it. They've told us so. We're going to look at the SERP feature data out of the US and out of the UK, and you'll see why we do that. And before I get started, let me just qualify things a bit. We're looking at page 1 data only, right? We all go to page 2 once a year. We're going to leave it aside. Page 1 only. So all the data you see here, be it on mobile, be it on desktop, be it in the UK, be it in the US, it's all page 1. Okay, that out of the way. You're going to see a stat or a metric called the relative rate. Let me explain that. The relative rate is the increase in the frequency in which Google shows a certain SERP feature on desktop relative to mobile, or vice versa, right? Let me give you an example. Let's just say LocalPack in the US, there's more LocalPacks on desktop than on mobile. The relative rate is the increase in the frequency in which Google shows LocalPacks on desktop relative to mobile. Or in the opposite case, more image thumbnails on mobile than on desktop. The relative rate would be the increase in the frequency in which Google shows image thumbnails on mobile relative to desktop. And this whole relative is the most important thing because we're analyzing mobile relative to desktop. I want to see the split, how Google shifts from desktop to mobile, how Google operates differently on mobile relative to desktop, and that's why we're looking at this whole relative rate. So here we go. All right, so first up the bat are image thumbnails out of the UK. So image thumbnails out of the UK, the bottom red line is image thumbnails on desktop. The top blue area graph is image thumbnails on mobile. Really simple, really short. There's a huge gap between image thumbnails on mobile and image thumbnails on desktop, with way more image thumbnails being on mobile than on desktop out of the UK. Jumping to image thumbnails in the US, and you have the same exact story, right? The bottom blue line is desktop, the top orange line is mobile, and there's this enormous gap between image thumbnails on mobile and image thumbnails on desktop, with way more image thumbnails being shown by Google on mobile than on desktop. So let's actually break down the numbers a little bit. The relative rate out of the US is 2,500% more on mobile than on desktop, meaning the increase in the frequency that Google is showing image thumbnails on mobile relative to desktop is 2,500% in the US. Now that number in the UK is 12,000%, but that's not totally the norm. The norm is usually about 5,000%. There was a spike at the end of August that made image thumbnails jump up on mobile relative to desktop. That's why you have that 12,000%. But normally speaking, the increase in the frequency in which Google is showing image thumbnails on mobile relative to desktop out of the UK is about 5,000%, which is still just downright enormous, right? Video thumbnails in the UK. Same story as image thumbnails, but the inverse, okay? Desktop in red, mobile in blue at the bottom. There are way more desktop video thumbnails in the UK than mobile video thumbnails. US, same story. Desktop has way more video thumbnails than mobile does. There's an enormous gap, much as there was image thumbnails, but the inverse. Okay, just take a look at the data. Both the US and the UK show an increase in the frequency of video thumbnails on desktop relative to mobile. Just take for example the UK. You have 6.22% of all page one SERPs have at least one video thumbnail on them on desktop, whereas only 0.18 on mobile. This is our first question right here, right? Why is it that there are so many more image thumbnails on mobile than on desktop? And then all of a sudden, when it comes to video thumbnails that are so different than image thumbnails, that the pattern becomes inverse, right? On desktop, there are way more video thumbnails than there are on mobile, versus mobile where there are way more image thumbnails. Why the inverse? Are video thumbnails really that drastically different than image thumbnails that you would have a whole different SERP trend? Up next are carousels on desktop. This is for the US and the UK, and we track two different types of carousels on desktop. One carousel is more image focused, the other more text focused. Let me give you an example. Say you did a search for your favorite sports team's roster, like the New York Yankees roster. You would get these images at the top of the SERP that is a carousel of who's on the team. Now if you did, let's say, a search for all Beatles songs, you would get these labels or these little cards in column form that list all the Beatles songs. Now, these labels actually remind me of those return address stickers that your grandparents would stick on an envelope. So that's a different kind of carousel. It's coded differently. So we track each separately. Now, if you look at the very beginning of the chart here in January, it looks like there's a low level, and then all of a sudden in February it spikes up. And now you have these, tons and tons of carousels on the desktop SERP. Not true. At the most, at the end of August, you're tracking in the US, one type of carousel shows on 0.5% of all SERPs. It's nothing. You're talking very few carousels, even combined, both forms combined, you're showing very, very few carousels on desktop. So now let's take a look at the mobile SERP and the carousels that Google's showing on mobile. This again, both the US and the UK, and it's a different story entirely. As opposed to desktop, you're actually showing a substantial amount of carousels on page one of the SERP. Just for example, in the US at the end of this chart, in August, as of August 31st, you're showing roughly about 3% of all page one SERPs on mobile have a form of carousel on it, right? Or in the UK, a little over 2% of all page one SERPs on mobile have a carousel, as opposed to 0.5%. So it's a different story as when it comes to carousels on mobile versus desktop. Just looking at the data and breaking it down a little bit, that relative rate, that increase in the frequency as Google is showing carousels on mobile relative to desktop in the US is about 408%, right? In the UK, going from desktop to mobile, the increase in the frequency in which Google is showing mobile carousels relative to desktop is a 257% increase. There are way more carousels on page one of the mobile SERP than on the desktop SERP. The data I just showed you, that was not really the full story. No, I'm not trying to deceive you, but there's actually another form of carousel that exists on mobile that A, doesn't exist on desktop, and that B, Google prefers versus this traditional carousel, and that's rich cards. Rich cards are a carousel. They show up often for recipes. The image is much bigger. The card is much bigger. There's ancillary information for a recipe, how long a recipe might take. There are reviews in there. It's a bigger card. It's a more informative card. It's a more visual card, and Google prefers to show. If you look at the data here, you have the UK in green and the US in blue. In the UK, Google shows rich cards on 7% of all page ones, and in the US, 6.5%. But you really have to, in other words, when you're looking at carousels on mobile, traditional carousels, the data I just showed you is not the full story. You have to combine that with the mobile unique carousels, i.e. rich cards. So altogether, if you combine the two carousel formats, traditional carousels and rich cards, you're talking about, in the US and the UK, between 9 and 10% of all page one SERPs have some form of carousel on them. Now compare that to desktop, where you're talking 0.6% of all page one SERPs have a carousel on them. Now that difference, that gap between mobile and desktop is far greater when you're talking about carousels. Which brings us to question 2 and 3. Why does the mobile SERP have so many carousels on page one as compared to desktop? In other words, if you include all those rich cards and the increase in the carousels relative to desktop, you're talking a major increase. You're talking maybe like 0.63, we said, 0.62 of all page one SERPs have some kind of carousel on desktop, and now you're talking around 9-10% on mobile. And the second question is, of all the carousel formats Google prefers on mobile, rich cards are way more preferred on mobile than traditional carousels, right? The traditional carousel in the US is, I think, we just saw about 2.5%, right? And then you're talking about rich cards at 6.5%. Google definitely prefers rich cards to the traditional carousel that you see on mobile. And the question is, why? Let's take a look at knowledge panel data. And this is really the crux of the whole issue. So we're in the UK here. Now, in the UK, you have a really interesting pattern that shows up. You have from January until about June, the middle of June, you have more mobile knowledge panels than you do on desktop. I've conveniently highlighted that for you in a nice little yellow box. Now, after June, yeah, you have more desktop knowledge panels than you do mobile, but it's not really that big of a difference, and you fluctuate back and forth a little bit, fine. But that's really the main thing, right? That you have more mobile knowledge panels in the UK for months, and then even afterwards, it's not really that big of a difference. Jump to the US, and yeah, you see a gap. Now that gap is a little bit deceiving because the gap really isn't as wide as it may appear. You're talking about usually around a 1 percentage point difference between mobile knowledge panels and desktop knowledge panels, with there being more desktop knowledge panels. At the end of August, where this data ends, you're talking about a giant point, half a percentage point difference between desktop and mobile knowledge panels. That's marginal. You're not talking about much of a difference at all. So there's two takeaways from this, okay? Very simply, in the UK, you have more mobile knowledge panels than you do desktop for 6.5 months. And then even after that, there's not really that big of a difference. Then in the US, you only have between 1 and 1.5 percentage point difference between mobile and desktop knowledge panels. Interesting. This is question 4, right? Now, keep in mind, on desktop, there's no organic competition between knowledge panel and the results. In other words, on desktop, knowledge panel exists on the right-hand side of the page. It's empty space. Google will love to fill it up with as many knowledge panels as possible. Where on mobile, knowledge panel is an organic eater, right? Knowledge panel is a big feature. It's a very, very large feature, and it eats up a ton of organic space. I would expect there to be far fewer mobile knowledge panels than there were desktop knowledge panels. In other words, where there is no competition for the space, so let Google show as many knowledge panels it wants to, right? But on mobile, where knowledge panel eats away at a lot of organic space, I would have thought there would be far fewer mobile knowledge panels than desktop. And the truth is, right, that we just saw in the UK, there were actually more knowledge panels on mobile than on desktop for quite a while. And in the US, the difference is not that great. Shouldn't it be the inverse? Just to sort of highlight this issue, and as you might say, well, Morty, Google never limits its SERP space consuming SERP features on mobile. If there's a big SERP feature that eats up a lot of space, well, Google never limits their rate of display on mobile. It's always the same. That's not true. And let's take a look at LocalPack, and I'll show you why. And this is why I want to show you the UK data. In the UK, you have desktop in that little light blue, and you have LocalPack on mobile in the gray. There is a small difference, about 1 percentage point difference between mobile and desktop LocalPacks in the UK, with there being slightly more desktop LocalPacks. But again, just like knowledge panel in the US, that's not a huge difference. Okay, so this is where it kind of gets kind of cool. We're taking a look at LocalPack in the US, and now you're going to first see a divergence between the US and the UK. In the US, the green line is desktop and the gray line is mobile. There's about a 5 to 7 percentage point gap between desktop and mobile LocalPacks in favor of desktop. And that's something to take note of. Right, just take a look at the comparison between LocalPack on desktop and LocalPack on mobile. In the US, you have about 42.5% of all page one SERPs have a LocalPack, where it's only 34.5% on mobile. That means that the frequency in which Google is showing LocalPack on desktop increases 18.5% relative to mobile. Okay, that's in favor of desktop. If you look at the UK, it's the opposite. Okay, you have only 18.75% of desktop page ones have a LocalPack on it, whereas almost 20% on the mobile SERP have it. Now that's an increase in the frequency in which Google is showing LocalPack on mobile relative to desktop of 5.5 okay, and in favor of mobile in this case. Why is this a big deal? You learn something very interesting from this, that Google at times will limit a SERP feature in order to maintain its organic results. It's not like it never does that. You see by LocalPack in the US, it does limit its display of a SERP feature and in favor of organic results. But it's interesting that it does that by LocalPack, but not by Knowledge Panel. In other words, LocalPack, I would think, would be the king of all SERP features on mobile, and it would limit Knowledge Panel and not LocalPack, but it's the inverse, right? And I would actually expect there to be way more LocalPacks on mobile than on desktop. LocalPack is meant for mobile. But in the end, right, even in the UK where you do have more LocalPacks on mobile than on desktop, it's not exactly a gargantuan difference. It's not exactly, wow, there's so many more LocalPacks on mobile than on desktop. Yeah, there are some more. It's not exactly a huge difference. I would expect mobile LocalPacks to dominate desktop LocalPacks, and it's not the case. And we're going to take a look at the organic results count. Okay, this is the average organic results per page. And if you look at the US and you look at the UK, the data on desktop, the data on mobile is not that different, meaning on average, you are going to have about 9.7, 9.5 organic results per page. Obviously, you don't have half a result per page, but on average, on desktop and on mobile, there's really not that big of a difference. Okay, looking at the UK, the same thing. There's really no difference. It's marginal between the average organic results you'll find on a desktop SERP and the average results you're going to find on a mobile SERP. But that's not exactly true. Why is that not exactly true? Well, it's sort of like my grandmother used to say, there's more than one way to skin a cat. There's more than one way to get to an average of, roughly speaking, 9.5 organic results per page. And to see that, you have to take a look at the breakdown. In other words, what percentage of SERPs show up with 10 results? What percentage show up with 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, right? Taking a look at the UK, taking a look at desktop on top, mobile on the bottom, the breakdown is relatively the same, meaning the desktop SERP has 9.8 organic results in the UK, 9.6 on mobile, and it gets to those numbers that average the same way, right? Just take a look at 10, right? 10 results. 72% of all page one SERPs on desktop have 72% of them are filled with 10 organic results. 69% of mobile page one SERPs have 10 results. That's not exactly a huge difference. Take a look at 9 results. 23% of all mobile pages, page one SERPs rather, have 9 results on them. 20% on desktop. You're not talking about anything more than marginal difference in the actual breakdown of the organic results that get you to that overall organic results per page average. So now in the US, okay, in the US, it's a little bit different. How you get to that 9.5, generally speaking, that 9.5 average results per page average on a desktop and mobile is different. The biggest difference I can show you is 10 results. 81% of all page one SERPs in the US contain 10 results. In the US on mobile, that's only 75%. You're talking about a 6-point swing, okay? What I find very interesting is that 8 results on desktop in the US are marginal. Only 1% of all page one SERPs have 8 results in them on desktop, whereas 4, actually it's a little more than 4, I just gave you the average, the rough estimate. 4% of all page one SERPs on mobile have 8 results. There's a few more 9 result pages on mobile than there are on desktop, but overall, the way that the US gets to that 9.5 average organic results per page on desktop is different than it is on mobile. Ain't that interesting considering what we saw about LocalPack? Let me just highlight the pattern here, okay? In the US, where the organic breakdown differs between desktop and mobile, meaning where there are more page ones showing with 10 results on desktop than there are on mobile, there are also fewer LocalPacks on mobile. Whereas in the UK, where the organic results breakdown does not differ, where you have, relatively speaking, the same amount of 10 results on page one on desktop than you do on as you do on mobile. There is no difference in the local pack, right? No, I'll say it again. Where Google is showing less less page one SERPs with 10 results, i.e. on mobile, in the US, there are less local packs where if there is no change, and the breakdown of how you get to that 9.5 average results per page on the SERP is the same on desktop as is on mobile, local pack is relatively the same on desktop and mobile, i.e. in the UK. And this all brings us to one last question. As SERPs with 10 organic results decrease on mobile and SERPs with 8 or 9 results increase, Google also reduces mobile local packs as well. And I'm pretty sure that's actually the first time I actually read the slide. In other words, Google, when the breakdown shows less 10 results, less pages with 10 organic results, Google also decreases the local pack, right? Where that number, that magic 10 results stay the same, so Google leaves local pack alone. It's interesting though, right, that Google will reduce mobile local packs when there's less organic results on the page, but not knowledge panels, right? Which again, it doesn't make any sense for mobile. I would argue that it makes no sense for mobile. On mobile, I would expect local pack to reign supreme and not knowledge panel. However, it's the opposite. Knowledge panel is the SERP feature that matches desktop, that stayed the same as desktop, or in the UK for a while was more than desktop. And when there's less organic results on the page, it's local pack that Google reduces the display of. Fascinating. Okay, so this is a good point to stop and to summarize where we are so far. Because I'm going to give you, as I promised, I'm going to give you an overall, overreaching theme and answer to explain all of these questions, and that shows a glimpse into what Google is thinking as it approaches the mobile SERP. So first question, why are there more image thumbnails on mobile than there are on desktop? And image thumbnails are actually a great place to start, even though you might be thinking, well, image thumbnails, who really cares? They're just image thumbnails. But they're the only place on the mobile SERP that Google has given us the reasoning behind their thinking, where you have a concrete place to start. Second question, why are there less, considering that there are more image thumbnails on mobile than there are on desktop, this trend does not continue, to video thumbnails. So why not? Why are there way more video thumbnails on desktop than there are on mobile? Question number 3. Why does Google prefer carousels on mobile? Why does it show more carousels on mobile than on desktop? And picking back off of that, versus traditional carousels, why does Google prefer to show rich cards as their carousel of choice on mobile? And last but not least, and the key to all of this, I believe, is knowledge panels are not limited on mobile, even though they are a organic SERP eating force. Google shows the same amount, relatively speaking, of mobile knowledge panels and desktop knowledge panels. Why? Why does it not show less mobile knowledge panels if they eat up organic results the same way that it does with local pack when they eat up organic results? Before I actually give you an answer, I'm going to tease you a little bit. I'm not going to give you the answer yet. I'm just going to give you a little bit of research, but I'm doing it to build up my case. The NIH, the National Institute of Health out of the US, has some fascinating stuff on digital touch. There's a touchscreen device and the way that it impacts you psychologically. And I believe that this is the basis of everything I'm about to tell you. Okay, first key point. The NIH concluded that when you touch an object on your touchscreen device, it's like touching a real-world object. In other words, let's say I'm looking at a pair of trousers, a pair of pants that I want to buy on my cell phone. And I'm touching the pants, I'm manipulating it, I'm making the picture bigger, smaller, checking to make sure that the seam and the color is exactly what I want it to be. I'm very particular. That's like touching a real world object, meaning that's like touching the actual pair of pants in the store, psychologically speaking. Point number 2, digital touch increases your sense of ownership and therefore mental stimulation. In other words, because I can manipulate this thing, I'm holding the device in my hand. Then on top of that, I'm actually manipulating the content, either the word content or picture content, image content. Let's take the pair of pants. It's the easiest case to go through. I am touching this. I am manipulating this image of the pair of pants that I want to buy. That increases my sense of ownership. I perceive that I have a sense of domination over the pair of pants, the picture. And that in turn increases mental stimulation, which is very important to note. The last point, Touchscreen devices, because you're holding them, because you can manipulate the objects on them, because there's a sense of connection that exists between you and the content on them, they feel like a part of us, right? It's just why you say, that's my cell phone. I don't really say that's my computer, it's my desktop. I mean, yeah, if I'm saying, hey, that's my desktop, don't use that. But I don't mean it the same way. That's my cell phone. It's really an extension of myself. And as a result of all of this, 3 different universities, possibly more, but I only found 3, the University of Manchester of England, the University of Antwerp, and the University of California in Riverdale, they all come to the same conclusion. Touchscreen technology has a tangible impact on increased user engagement. Let me spell it out. Because I feel a greater degree of ownership, and because I have a greater degree of mental stimulation when I'm touching an object on my touchscreen device, I am now engaged psychologically differently than I would be on a desktop device where I have a mouse as a medium between me and the screen, where I actually have a sense of ownership, where I actually perceive that this thing is a part of me. My brain, my psyche, is tangibly more engaged on such devices. And that's a huge point to consider. Why? Because Google knows this. If I spend an hour or two researching this and I found this, you don't think Google knows about this? Right? Google knows that there's a huge psychological impact with touchscreen technology. And I'm not talking about like a sort of on the surface, a more surface-like emotional state, like a mood, right? Mobile devices, touchscreen devices make me happier. A mood is very transient. You're talking about deep-seated emotional states, whereas I think this is an extension of myself. There's things related to identity and ownership. I'm much more deep-seated than more surface-like, more transient emotions. Okay, they're talking about things that are much more tied to who we are, how we perceive ourselves and our surroundings, than you are other more surface-like emotions. Okay, Google knows that, and Google knows that this has a major impact on user engagement. Thus, therefore, I am proposing that Google sees the mobile web as one giant app. Okay? In other words, an app where the content is visually centered and you have layer upon layer of content, all because it relates to increased user engagement, because it allows for increased user engagement. Google relates the entire mobile SERP this way. And it's all based on the touchscreen technology. With that, now we can actually start answering all of these questions. So let's go through them one by one, right? We had this whole question about image thumbnails. Why more image thumbnails on mobile than on desktop? Well, Google actually told us this one a couple of months back, maybe a year ago. Google said, hey, we're going to increase the amount of image thumbnails on mobile because we want a visually stimulating SERP. Which is their words. I didn't say that. They said that. Why? Why do they want a more colorful visual SERP? Because there's increased user engagement on the mobile SERP. Now think about it like this, okay? I'm a user. I'm using the mobile SERP. I'm using my phone to surf the web. Do people still say surf? Whatever. I said surf, okay? Because I'm on mobile and there's this increased stimulation and engagement, I expect to be engaged differently on mobile than I do on desktop. And if I'm not engaged at that level, I will walk away feeling unsatisfied. I'll walk away feeling, well, something is missing. I was primed. I'm ready for this engagement, and Google didn't give it to me. So Google said, we're going to give it to you. We are going to give you this visual stimulation because you are expecting more stimulation, more engagement on a mobile device than you are on desktop. Video thumbnails are also visually engaging. I mean, really, the only difference is, again, that little triangle play button. Visual stimulation would be increased by having video thumbnails. But unlike desktop, mobile, when you click on that video thumbnail, you're opening a separate app. In other words, on desktop, I search for a Rolling Stone song, right? I click on the video thumbnail, right? If I'm smart about it, I'll open up a new page, and I'll listen to my Rolling Stone song while I am working on my work, right? I can do both at the same time. There's no real break. It's just a new tab. Not so on mobile. Clicking on that video thumbnail opens up an entire new app. Why is that important? Because if I'm telling you, and if we're saying that the whole idea on the mobile service is sort of like increased hypnotic engagement that Google wants to capitalize on, if all of a sudden you opened up a new app that redirected you to a whole new ecosystem, that would break. That would serve as a disconnect and a disassociation from the mental flow that Google needs to capitalize on user engagement, which is why, even though video thumbnails are an increase in the visualization on the mobile SERP, Google says, we're not showing them because we don't want to break that mental engagement that we are banking on. That is our whole purpose on the mobile SERP. Moving on to the next data set, carousels. So why are there more carousels on the mobile SERP? Well, that kind of fits right in, doesn't it? There are more carousels because they're visually engaging. There are pictures, there are images. If we're banking on, if we're relying on the fact that Google themselves told us they want a more visual SERP, carousels help that happen. But there's another two things that carousels offer that a regular, say, image thumbnail does not. One is, when you use a carousel, you have to scroll, you have to use your finger. In other words, that actual touch element of the mobile, of a mobile device, of a touchscreen device, comes into play with the carousel. I have now made the user touch the screen in order to manipulate the content. That increased sense of ownership and that increased stimulation and engagement are now on the rise. Plus, and this is a major thing also, deeper engagement needs deeper content. Okay, we're not stupid, right? People want, if you're going to be engaged, it has to be visual, it has to be emotional, but there has to be, I hate to use the word intellectual because it's not exactly what I mean, but there has to be a cognitive, there we go, a cognitive increase as well. So deeper content needs to be a part of the equation, and carousels help create deeper content. There's more content. I am now, instead of just looking at one or two things, I can look at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 things. There's more content which helps increase that deeper engagement that satisfies the part of ourselves that wants to be cognitively stimulated on the mobile SERP more so than on desktop. But why rich cards? In other words, we said rich cards are the format that Google prefers to show on the mobile SERP when it comes to carousels. Why? Well, that's sort of obvious at this point, because if we're saying that Google wants to have those pictures there, those visual stimulations, well, rich cards are more stimulating than a regular carousel because the image is bigger and the content is more engaging because there is more content. As opposed to a regular carousel, you have ancillary information, how long a recipe will take, for example, how many stars it got, whatever it is. There's increased content, increased visual stimulation, there's increased engagement. So why would Google show a regular carousel when it can show a rich card? But not local packs? Why are local packs not part of this engagement equation? I like that. The engagement equation is not satisfied by a local pack because a local pack is linear. In other words, when I'm searching for that local pizza place, as a user, I'm expecting an answer. I want to be in, I want to be out. That's my mindset. Now, Google does try to keep me there sometimes. It offers me to discover more places in other carousels, and it's tested carousel formats, and then the local pack and the local finder has all sorts of filters and whatnot. But fundamentally speaking, I'm out and about. I want to find a pub to have a drink in. Google offers me a few results, 3 results, or if I click the local finder some more, of local places that I can grab a beer at. I don't want anything more than that. Or I'm not intent, that's the right word. I'm not intent on anything more than that. I want the answer, I want to go have a drink. I don't want you to keep engaging me, Google. So Google doesn't. Google says, okay, we get it, you don't want to be, so we will limit local packs when there is a space issue because it doesn't fall into exactly our engagement philosophy in the mobile SERP. Interesting, right? But why all of the knowledge panel? It doesn't really answer why Google does not limit the knowledge panel. Because knowledge panel is awesome for engagement. Knowledge panels are perfect. First off, okay, it has that visual stimulation to it. It has maps and pictures and different sorts of formats. That it's visually appealing. In a lot of ways, it looks nice on the SERP. Different colors. Look, when you type in, say, a movie, and the knowledge panel shows up on mobile, one movie is going to be one color, another color. Google likes showing you colors because, hey, look, knowledge panel is a way to increase the visual stimulation on the SERP, on the mobile SERP. Notice, by the way, that the knowledge panel on desktop is not very colorful. It's not very flashy because Google doesn't need to engage you on that level because you don't expect to be engaged on that level. 2, the functionality on the knowledge panel is diverse. In other words, if we're saying that when you touch the actual screen, there's an increased sense of ownership and stimulation, there are a lot of different ways to actually interact with the knowledge panel, which make it perfect for engagement. You can press this, scroll this, expand this. There's all sorts of different actual touch functionality on the knowledge panel. And two, it's endlessly deep and layered. In other words, one of my favorite things on the mobile SERP is movie knowledge panels. You click on, you type in a movie, you type in Forrest Gump, an all-time favorite, right? And you have your summary of the movie, you have reviews, even you have a full list of the cast and characters. So I'll click on Tom Hanks. I like Tom Hanks. All of Tom Hanks movies now open up in a separate overlay, in a separate knowledge panel. So now I'll click on Castaway, and a totally new knowledge panel will open up with a new overlay. And I'll keep doing this over and over and over and over again. And new overlays and new knowledge panels all show up that satisfy that hypnotic sense of engagement that I'm looking for on the mobile SERP. From knowledge panel to knowledge panel to knowledge panel, I'm endlessly engaged in this deeply layered content. With all this, with this whole engagement philosophy of the mobile SERP, I want to make an overall point that I think is, of all the things I'm going to say or I have said, is the most important thing. We all think of, well, why is Google going with the mobile SERP? Why is it be a mobile first index, mobile this, mobile that? Well, there's more mobile. There's more users, more searchers, more everything mobile. I am saying it is not just, and it is primarily not, an issue of quantity. It's an issue of quality. Google wants to go mobile not only because, or not primarily, and that's what I'm throwing out there, not primarily because of there's more mobile users, more mobile searches, but because the quality of the mobile user is entirely superior than the desktop user. The mobile user is infinitely more engaged. Google can get more in with the mobile user versus the desktop user, and that's why it's going for all things mobile. Besides for all the theoretics behind all this and the whole theory of the philosophy of Google wanting to match, meet, and take advantage of, in a good way, capitalize on the increased engagement of the user on the mobile SERP, there are some actionable things that you can do based on this. The first thing is Google tests continuously. Right? If you follow my SERP news that I put out once a month, or if you follow one of the other news outlets, Barry Schwartz's SEO Roundtable, you'll see a ton of testing going on to mobile local packs, mobile knowledge panels, etc., etc., etc. Google continuously is testing its mobile SERP features. You want to be on top of that because there could be actual practical implications that you might want to take advantage of. I'll give you just a quick example. Google has a new Q&A feature in its local panels. You can, as a business, you can insert kind of an FAQ of sorts. You can put in questions and answer them right on the knowledge panel. That's a great thing to take advantage of. If you're up to date on the news, you will take advantage of that. Aim for rich content. Structured snippets, image thumbnails. Put it this way. If Google, as I showed you, prefers image thumbnails on the mobile SERP, if it has two sites to choose from, one is optimized for an image thumbnail, one is not, which site do you think Google is going to show? So don't miss out on the opportunities there. This is interesting. This is a little bit dangerous or out there. I'm going to throw it out there anyway. Try to convert from the SERP. In other words, if users are being trained almost like Pavlov's dog to expect all the information right on the SERP, we'll give it to them if that's what they're expecting, at risk to other considerations. And I'm not saying do this all the time. You have to be strategic about it. But like, for example, call option in the local pack. Don't expect them to go to your site to get the phone number if you're a restaurant or whatever. Put the call, make sure you are optimized to have that call option right there so they can call you right from so the user can call you right from the local pack. You might want to consider fully answering a feature snippet. I know there's a major theory out there, a major push. Don't answer the full feature snippet, have them click. But the way the user relates to the mobile SERP, you might want to consider doing that and building up authority as opposed to clicks. Reviews. Why do I say that? Because, well, the knowledge panel on mobile is expandable, meaning you don't see everything right away. There's an overlay that comes up when you expand the box. But usually, reviews will be above the fold, so to speak. Before you expand the box, the reviews will be there. So say you're a restaurant and you have reviews on Facebook. Google will show those reviews, those Facebook reviews, and say, yeah, you got a 2 out of 4 from Facebook. That will be before you ever expand the box. So focus on those reviews to make sure that they're good and make sure that they're there, especially for local businesses. Take advantage of Google Posts. Google Posts is sort of like, I'll call it Twitter for the SERP. You can push out, a business can push out content, image content, written content, right on the SERP. And on mobile, you can do it in a local panel. You can put in updates on what your business is doing or some kind of special offers you want to put out there via Google Posts. And I'm not talking specifically or just about Google Posts. Notice what I mean is when Google offers you a way to push your own content out in the SERP feature, take advantage of that. You'd be a fool not to do that, right? For example, I'll go back to the Q&A thing, right? Google puts out this new Q&A thing. You can have essentially an FAQ in a local in a local panel. It's an opportunity for you to push out your own content right on the SERP. If a user is going to see your local business, they're going to see the knowledge panel there. They're not going to I'm going to say this, there's a good chance they're not going to click on your actual site. They're just going to go to that local panel. Well, if you want the user to see your unique content, something you put there, something that Google didn't put there, that you put there, make sure you take advantage of that. And with that, I thank you for joining me as we went through Google's mobile SERP outlook and philosophy. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it useful. And if you have any questions or comments, reach out to me. Take care.